The announcement board flickered above me, a blur of blue light and strange names. My fingers tightened around the stack of boarding passes, 5 of them, all booked under my name. The paper cut into my skin, sharp as the realization that something was terribly wrong. I turned in a slow circle. The crowd pressed forward, families hugging, children dragging suitcases with squeaky wheels, voices bouncing off the glass walls. But the faces I was searching for, my son Lucas, his wife Anna, were gone. My phone buzzed. A single message lit the screen. "Go on your own, Mom. We're busy." For a moment, the air left my lungs. The cold air conditioning bit at my arms, but the chill came from inside me. I stared at the words, waiting for the punchline, the apology, the just kidding. Nothing came. Around me, the world kept moving, but inside my chest, time cracked open. I whispered aloud, though no one could hear me. "Busy? You left me here with everything?" A child nearby laughed. A rolling suitcase toppled. An intercom voice announced another boarding gate. Life carried on as if nothing had happened. Yet I stood rooted to the floor, my tickets trembling in my hand like meaningless scraps of paper. And in that instant, I knew I hadn't just been left behind at an airport. I had been abandoned by the very people I loved most. Hook, line, closing sentence. I stood in the vast, humming airport, clutching a handful of worthless tickets, and understood I'd just been deserted by my own blood. The white mask lay on my bedside table, staring at me with empty eyes. Its surface was smooth, untouched, as if mocking the cracks that had spread through my own life. I had carried that mask for decades, through every move, every workshop, every sleepless night. Whenever I touched it, memories spilled out like dust from a torn sack. I was 29 when my husband died. Lucas was only 5. His hair still smelled of soap bubbles. His laughter still bounced off the peeling walls of our apartment in Venice. That night, after the funeral, I sat at the workbench and cut paper, layer after layer, gluing them with trembling hands. The mask I made then was crude, uneven, streaked with my tears. Yet it sold, and so did the next one. 24 years passed that way, 24 years of glue-stained fingers, eyes burning from varnish, and back bent over wooden molds. 300 masks I counted, each leaving my hands like a piece of my flesh torn away. Some were adorned with gold leaf, some with painted feathers, others simple, blank, but all carried the same purpose: to pay for Lucas's books, his uniforms, his tuition. I used to whisper to myself at dawn, "As long as he's happy, I can bleed through my hands." It became my prayer, my bargain with the universe. I remember the winters most vividly. The workshop unheated, breath hanging in the air like smoke. My fingertips cracked until they bled, staining the white papier-mâché. I would laugh bitterly and tell Lucas, "See, even the masks wear your mother's blood." He would giggle, too young to understand, and press his small palm over the cut. There were brighter moments, too. When he was accepted into university in Florence, I sold a collection of 6 carnival masks to a gallery. The gallery paid $17,400. I signed the check, turned it into his tuition, and celebrated with him over pasta and a single bottle of cheap Chianti. He clinked his glass with mine and said, "One day, Mom, I'll take care of you." I believed him, foolishly maybe, but I believed. Even then, small shadows crept in. I recall how Anna, still just his girlfriend, once asked lightly, "So all these masks, they're worth a fortune, right?" Her tone was joking, but her eyes lingered too long on the display case. I laughed it off, telling myself I was imagining things. The mask on my table now seems heavier than it should. Maybe it always was. Maybe it has been carrying the weight of my silence all these years. I still remember the smell of glue and paper pulp that clung to my skin when Lucas was a boy. He would run in circles around the workbench, waving strips of newspaper like magic wands, shouting, "Mom is a magician. She turns paper into faces." I laughed back then. though my eyes stung with exhaustion. Maybe I believed him more than I should have. Maybe that's why I kept bleeding my hands for decades, because my little boy once thought I was a sorceress. There was the day I landed my first big commission. A gallery wanted 12 Venetian masks for a carnival exhibition. I worked through 3 nights, my fingertips blistered from cutting wire and pressing wet papier-mâché into wooden molds. When the payment came, 200, it felt like a fortune. I didn't spend a cent on myself. I walked straight to a shop near Piazza San Marco and bought Lucas a red bicycle. I can still see his face. Wide eyes, cheeks flushed with excitement, his small hands gripping the handlebars. He rode circles in the courtyard, laughing so hard he nearly toppled over. That sound still echoes in me. On the highest shelf of my workshop, I placed a single white mask, plain, unpainted, untouched. It became my secret, a reminder of the self I kept hidden, the face I never dared to show. No one was allowed to touch it, not even Lucas, especially not him. It was a quiet Sunday dinner. The soup still steamed, carrying the scent of bay leaves. We sat at the wooden table, just me, Lucas, and Anna. Anna stirred her spoon lazily, then said in a tone so light it almost floated away, "Mother, you have savings, don't you? Why not put them in our name for convenience?" The spoon slipped in my hand. The broth splashed against the rim of the bowl. Lucas didn't react, just kept chewing his bread. My stomach clenched. Something sharp pressed against the back of my throat. I forced a smile, telling myself she must have meant nothing by it. Just a practical question, perhaps. Just paperwork. But as I lifted the spoon again, I caught sight of the white mask on the shelf in the hallway. The light from the chandelier brushed across its surface, casting a shadow that seemed longer than the object itself. The hall glittered with balloons and champagne glasses. It was Lucas's 32nd birthday, a night meant for celebration. Music thumped from the speakers, relatives raised toasts, and laughter spilled like wine. Then, in the middle of the clamor, Anna's voice rose above it all. "If you really love us, Mother, then sign the deed. Hand over the house. Show everyone how much you care." The chatter died, heads turned. Heads turned. I froze with a glass in my hand. My pulse roared in my ears. I opened my mouth, but no words came. The music blurred, the clinking glasses vanished. All I could hear was the thud of my own heart, beating like a drum against my ribs. I stared at Lucas. He didn't stop her. He didn't even flinch. He just looked away, as though embarrassed, not for her, but for me. My hands trembled. I felt something slide from the table behind me. The white mask, the one I had hidden for decades, toppled and struck the marble floor. A crack split across its cheek, jagged and deep. The room erupted in whispers, but inside me, there was only silence. The night after the airport, I boiled water for tea. The kettle hissed, a thin whistle in the empty kitchen. I dropped a tea bag into a chipped cup and sat at the table, staring at the rising steam. Such an ordinary act, yet in it, I felt the weight of everything I had carried for years. The house was silent, too silent. Once it had been filled with Lucas's piano practice, with Anna's chatter about dresses, with the scrape of chairs pulled for dinners I cooked. Now there was nothing, just the hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the clock. I pressed my palm against my chest. My heart still ached, bruised from the airport scene. They had left me with 5 tickets. I had paid for every seat. I had held their passports, their luggage tags, their boarding passes. I had believed we were flying together, and then gone. The tea cooled, untouched. I whispered into the empty kitchen. Who am I? Am I a mother or a walking wallet? Am I loved or simply useful? If my money dried up, would my son even recognize me? The questions came like hammer strikes, quick and merciless. I bowed my head over the cup, as though answers might rise in the steam. None did, only the bitter scent of black tea, sharp enough to sting my nose. I stood. walked to the study, opened the safe. Inside lay my savings, my documents, and the little white mask I had hidden even from myself. My hands trembled as I lifted the key. It felt heavier than it should, a weight of decades pressed into metal. I could still hear Lucas's voice years ago. One day, Mom, I'll take care of you. But what if that day never came? What if it was never meant to come? If I didn't change, I knew what would happen. I would be drained, emptied, carved hollow like the wooden molds I used for my masks. My health would fail. My dignity would be spent. I would become invisible, a bank account with a pair of trembling hands. And so I turned the key. Click. The lock sealed. I pulled it free, curled my fingers around the cool brass, and pressed it against my heart. My breathing steadied. The silence around me no longer crushed. It cleared. For the first time, the lines of my life shifted. I was not only the giver, not only the fool clinging to promises. I was something else now, someone who could say no. I slipped the key into my pocket. My voice, when I spoke aloud, surprised me. It was steady, firm. For once, I will protect myself, not the tickets, not the trips, not anyone else's comfort, myself. The tea on the table had gone cold. I poured it down the sink, the stream dark and final. The days after I locked the safe felt like walking across thin ice. Every step made a sound I feared would break the silence. Lucas stopped speaking to me. He moved through the house with his eyes lowered, as though I were a stranger renting a corner of his home. At dinner, he pushed food around his plate without lifting his head. The scrape of his fork was louder than any word he refused to say. Anna, on the other hand, spoke, but only through messages. My phone lit up one night with her name. One sentence, sharp as a blade. "You'll regret this, Mother." I stared at the screen until the letters blurred. My thumb hovered over the keyboard, but I couldn't answer. What could I write? That I was scared? That I was tired of being their currency? I set the phone down, face down, and the silence grew heavier still. Even the walls seemed to notice. The corridors of the house, once echoing with chatter, now carried only the hollow rhythm of footsteps. Lucas's steps at night, slow, deliberate, sounded like knocks on a coffin lid. Each one thudded against my nerves, warning me that something inevitable was coming. During the day, I hid in my workshop. The smell of glue, the faint sweetness of paper pulp, the sting of varnish, these had been my companions for half a lifetime. Now they felt like smoke from a fire burning too close. I bent over a half-finished mask, but my hands would not steady. I whispered into the empty room, "Am I being cruel? Too harsh?" The white mask on the shelf offered no reply. One evening, I caught Lucas looking at me, just a glance across the hallway. His eyes were unreadable, shadowed. I almost opened my mouth to call his name, to bridge the silence. But then he turned away, shutting his bedroom door with a slow, deliberate click. The tension coiled tighter. Even small sounds became unbearable. The creak of the floorboards, the hum of the fridge, the tick of the living room clock. I sat alone at night, listening, waiting for the storm to break. Then came the omen. A letter arrived in the mail, addressed not to me but to Lucas. The envelope bore the seal of a law office. I held it in my hands for a long moment, the paper rough beneath my fingers, before slipping it under his door. He didn't thank me. He didn't even look at me. That night, I barely slept. Shadows stretched across the ceiling like cracks in plaster. I thought of all the laughter that had once filled these rooms. Birthday songs, piano notes, the clatter of dishes. All gone, stripped away, leaving only the sound of time itself. The living room was the same as always, same rug, same shelves, same clock ticking on the wall. Yet that day, it felt poisoned. The curtains were drawn too tight, the air too still, as though the house itself held its breath. I sat at the table with a cup of cold coffee. The door opened, and Lucas walked in, not alone. A tall man in a dark suit followed him. Behind them, Anna clutched a folder to her chest. Mother, Lucas said, his voice clipped. This is Mr. Carvalho. He's here to help settle things. I looked at the lawyer, then at my son. My own son, introducing a stranger into my home as if I were the intruder. Carvalho nodded politely but did not smile. Anna stepped forward, her heels striking the floor like hammer blows. She dropped the folder on the table. Papers spilled out. Contracts, deeds, numbers I knew too well. Why are you making this so hard? She asked softly. Her voice was sugar, but her eyes steel. It's only logical. Transfer the property. It's safer in our hands. I felt my hands tighten around the coffee cup. Safer, I repeated. The word burned. Lucas leaned closer, his voice low, persuasive. Mom, surely you don't want to be alone managing all this. Why struggle? Let us take care of it. I met his gaze. Take care of it, or take it. His jaw flexed. Don't twist this. We're your family. The silence stretched. Then he pushed again, sharper. Mother, are you really going to be stingy with your own son? My throat tightened, but my voice came out steady. It's not stinginess. It's the first time in my life I've dared to say, enough. Anna's lips curled. She flicked one paper toward me. Sign. Right now. I didn't move. My pulse thudded against my ribs. Lucas slammed his hand on the table. Why are you doing this to us? I looked at him. The boy I had raised, the boy who once thought I was a magician, now a man demanding my surrender. Because I'm tired of bleeding for everyone but myself, I said quietly. Carvalho cleared his throat. Mrs. Moretti, refusal may complicate matters legally. I advise. I cut him off. My voice rose for the first time. You advise what? That I hand over the only roof above my head? That I erase myself so they can live easier? The lawyer fell silent. Anna's eyes sharpened. If you don't, we'll have to. Escalate. I laughed. A small, bitter sound. Escalate. Against your own mother. Lucas shifted uncomfortably, but Anna pressed on. Don't be dramatic. It's business. Sign, and no one gets hurt. My hands trembled, but I pushed the papers back across the table. The sheets slid like dead leaves. No, I said. One word. Simple, final. The air changed. Anna's face hardened. Lucas's shoulders stiffened. A storm gathered in their silence. He whispered, almost pleading, Mom. I looked at him, really looked, and I felt the line inside me draw itself sharp and unbreakable. I was no longer a suitcase stuffed with money for them to drag wherever they pleased. The blow didn't come with shouting. It came folded in a neat trifold inside a leather folder that didn't belong to me. I found it by accident. Tuesday, 10:43 a.m. The light through the kitchen window making strips on the floor. I was wiping the table when the folder slid from the chair where Anna had sat the night before. It hit the tiles with a soft thud, mouth gaping. Papers breathed out. I crouched to gather them and stopped. On the top page, my name curved across the bottom in familiar loops. My signature. The date stamped 0304, the property address, the phrase that sliced me open, irrevocable power of attorney. My hands went cold first, then hot, then cold again. I lifted the page closer. The R of Renata was mine, but not mine. Too obedient, too tidy. I pressed the pad of my thumb to the ink as if touch could tell truth from forgery. My thumb trembled. The room spun a little. I whispered to the empty kitchen, that's not my hand. And because terror is a strange kind of mercy, when it tightens around your throat, it sharpens your eyes. I started to see. The witness name, Paulo S. A notary stamp from an office I'd never visited. A second page, copies of my ID, my tax number. A third, a schedule of assets, already itemized. House, savings, workshop tools. I set the papers down, then picked them up again. My breath grew shallow. I could hear the clock in the living room counting each useless second. Somewhere outside, a scooter buzzed away. My world, meanwhile, narrowed to the curl of a fake letter on the T of my last name. I took a photo. Then another, each one closer, date, seal, signature. My hands still shook, but my eyes were clear. This, I said aloud, is the evidence. By noon, I was at Alberto's office. He had been my late husband's friend, silver hair, ink-stained fingers, a lawyer who still preferred fountain pens. He skimmed the pages once, twice, a third time, jaw tightening. This loop on the R, he tapped. You don't do this. I don't, I said. My voice sounded foreign to me. And the date on the 3rd of April, I was at the clinic with my neighbor, Ines. 10,005 to 11,000. They have sign-in logs. He nodded. We'll get them. Also, the pharmacy across the street has CCTV. If we place you there around the notarization time, the stamp collapses. Paulo S., I asked. Likely a runner. Notary seals get borrowed. We'll verify the register. He placed the pages on his desk as if they were live wires. Then he looked at me, really looked. Renata, this is ugly. They're not just pushing you, they're pushing you out. I know, I said. I tried to swallow, my throat was sand. I didn't think they'd go this far. Alberto leaned back. People do strange arithmetic when they believe love owes them compound interest. I almost laughed. Instead, I pressed my fingers to my temples. I'm not just losing family, I said. I'm becoming a rumor. The rumors arrived before dinner. At 16:22, my phone buzzed. Heard you're transferring the house. Finally, congratulations. From a cousin I hadn't spoken to in months. At 16:35, is it true you can't manage your finances? Lucas told me he's stepping in for your own good. The message stung more than I expected. For your own good. How quickly care can turn into a cage. At 17:10, a neighbor at the grocer's counter. It's better this way, dear. Young people handle paperwork so well. Less stress at your age. She patted my wrist as if soothing a skittish animal. I stood there with a carton of milk and wanted to vanish. The cashier scanner beeped, the world moved on, and I swallowed an ache the size of my tongue. Back home, another envelope waited under my door, a courtesy notice from a law firm I didn't recognize. Pending registration of power of attorney, pending. As if my life were a parcel in transit. I pressed the notice flat on the table and stared at the words until they blurred. If lies repeated themselves long enough, would the walls believe them too? That night, the counterweights appeared, small, human, unexpected. Ines knocked at 19 ounce and 2 with a Tupperware of caldo verde. You didn't show your face today, she said. So I brought the soup to your face. I poured her tea and told her about the papers, the fake signature, the calls. She listened the way good listeners do, with the whole body, not just the ears. When I finished, she placed her palm over the back of my hand. On April 3rd, you signed in with me at the clinic. If they need my mouth to say it, my mouth will say it. At 2015, Alberto texted, junior associate joining the file. Marta, sharp eyes, she'll help gather documents. Minutes later, a second message from a number I didn't know. This is Marta. Please don't worry if I ask repetitive questions. Repetition is how truth grows teeth. I smiled despite everything. Teeth, I repeated, tasting the word. I imagined the white mask in my workshop, smooth, blank, growing a bite. The next day was a pendulum. Tight, then loose, then tight again. Tight, Marta and I visited the pharmacy. The manager scrolled the CCTV from 10, 20, 11, 40 on 0304. There I was, blurred but unmistakable, fumbling with coins, buying bandages for a paper cut. Time stamps, clear as cathedral bells. We took copies. The receipt matched the camera, 30 AD at 10,037. Loose. We celebrated with bad espresso on the curb. Marta stirred hers with a wooden stick. Find joy where it costs the least, she said, almost to herself. Height again, Anna called me at 13:26. You're making this difficult. We can file a petition. You know that, right? Her sweetness acid washed off every syllable. File what you like, I said. I won't sign a lie. You already did, she whispered, satisfied. You just forgot. The call ended. I stared at the dead screen, the echo of that last sentence crawling into my ear like a worm. You just forgot. Oh, the neatness of that cruelty folding deceit into my age, as if memory were their alibi. By late afternoon, the witnesses began to appear, some real, some counterfeit. Carvalho, now on the other side of the table, submitted a statement from a barista who swore I'd been near the notary's office on AO304 around 11:15. White-haired lady with a blue scarf, the statement read. It would have been a good lie if I hadn't donated that scarf to the church sale in February. Inez found the church ledger, donation lot A27, blue silk scarf A2219. We built a tower of small truths, a clinic sign-in, a pharmacy receipt, a church ledger, 2 voicemails from the day in question where I argued with my supplier about a late shipment of gesso, timestamp 09/52 and 12,003. Each scrap ordinary, each one heavier than the polished, perfect lie. Still, the bending hurt. A cousin refused to answer my calls. An aunt forwarded a voice note. Anna's voice, carefully broken. We're only trying to help her. She forgets things. She gets lost. A lie with a quiver installed. Ooh, night came with rain. In the workshop, the smell of wet paper grew sweet and medicinal. I ran my fingers over the white mask on the shelf, the one no one touched. A hairline crack, born at the birthday party, had widened while I wasn't looking. I traced it. It felt like a map out of somewhere I no longer wished to live. I whispered to the mask, to the room, to the woman I had been, you're not breaking. You're revealing the fault line. The allies held. Marta. Will subpoena the notary's register. Alberto and the runner Paolo. If he exists outside the stamp. Inés. I'll bake on the day you're due in court. Sugar steadies hands. A message chimed from a number labeled Duarte Frame Shop. CCTV catches sidewalk, 11:30 thou. She, your face in frame. Want the drive? I hadn't realized his shop camera saw that far. He remembered because of my distinct tote with red paint smears. You always carry your work with you, he wrote. Yesterday I thought that was poetry. Today I think it's evidence. I thanked him and sat with that sentence. You always carry your work with you. It was true. And now, finally, my work would carry me. But the fear didn't leave. It learned to sit quietly beside me. What if their narrative grew so tall it blocked out the sun? What if a judge squinted at me and saw only a stubborn woman, not a careful one? What if love, when measured against paper, always came up short? I lay awake counting not masks, not euros, but costs, the price of telling the truth when the other side offers a cleaner story. My chest hurt in a dull, steady way, like a bruise pressed by time. At 2011, I rose and wrote everything down. Dates, names, smells, sounds. I described the exact pitch of Anna's voice when she said, "You'll regret this." I noted the precise moment the leather folder fell. 10:43, as if pinning a butterfly to a board. I wrote until the sun thought about showing itself. When I finally stopped, I felt lighter, not safe, but anchored. I washed my face, I tied my hair, I locked the safe and put the key in my pocket. The metal rested there like a small, cool promise. I am not a suitcase, I told the mirror. I am not a rumor. I am a woman with receipts. Outside, the rain slackened. The street smelled rinsed. Somewhere, a church bell struck the hour, clear and contained. I breathed in, breathed out, and asked the question that would carry me into the next act. When the truth finally steps into the light of a courtroom, will it be enough to burn through a lie that everyone already prefers to believe? Alberto's office smelled of old books and ink, like a library that had never agreed to retire. He leaned back in his chair, spectacles low on his nose, and tapped the folder between us. These are not just papers, Renata, he said. They're weapons. You must treat them that way. I nodded, though my stomach clenched. The folder contained copies of the forged power of attorney, my pharmacy receipt, the clinic sign-in logs, the church ledger for the donated scarf, the CCTV images where my blurred face stumbled into focus. Each page felt heavier than steel. I slipped the documents back into my satchel, hugging them close as if they could guard me in my sleep. The nights leading up to the trial blurred together. I became a collector of scraps. Receipts, messages, voicemails, photographs, anything that could prove I had not betrayed myself. I arranged them on the dining table like soldiers in formation. On one page, Anna's text, "You'll regret this." On another, my own bank statement showing not a single transfer to their names after the day at the airport. The table looked like a battlefield and I an unlikely general. I practiced my testimony in front of the mirror. At first, my voice wavered, the words falling flat. "My name is Renata Moretti," I whispered, barely able to hear myself. I tried again, louder this time. On April 3rd, I was at the clinic with my neighbor. I did not and could not sign any paper of transfer, but halfway through, my throat closed. I heard echoes of my old self. The mother who stayed quiet at family dinners, who swallowed insults with soup, who signed checks without asking questions. That woman still lived in me, dragging at my tongue. I pressed both hands to the sink and forced myself to look up. The woman in the mirror had silver in her hair, lines at the corners of her mouth, but her eyes were bright. Again, I told her. I repeated my statement until the tremor in my voice thinned, until the words landed like stones instead of feathers. By the third night, I no longer sounded like a victim. I sounded like someone with ground beneath her feet. Support came in small, steady doses. At dusk one evening, Ines knocked on my door carrying a loaf of still warm bread. She placed it on the counter and said simply, "Bread for strength. You'll need it." The next morning, my neighbor Duarte handed me a flash drive, footage from my shop camera. It shows you walking by at 11:30 that day. Keep it safe. His fingers closed around mine, firm, and keep yourself safe. Even Marta, the young associate, became a quiet anchor. She called me late one night after sifting through bank records. "Renata, your timeline is consistent. It sings the same tune every time. Don't let them silence that." Their words stitched a net beneath me. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was standing alone on a cliff. Still, the fear was real. At night, I dreamed of courtrooms turning into carnivals, of masks jeering down at me, of Lucas watching with folded arms as strangers carved my name off the deed. I woke with sweat soaking my sheets, my hand clamped around the safe key under my pillow. But each morning, I returned to the table. I reviewed the evidence. I timed my statements aloud, measuring breaths. I wrote them down, then rewrote them until every word carried the weight of truth. Preparing for court felt less like paperwork and more like sharpening a blade. Each receipt I tucked into its folder was another edge honed. Each photograph labeled was another strike ready. I wasn't sharpening the blade to wound. I was sharpening it to survive. The night before the hearing, Alberto called. "Renata, tomorrow you must speak clearly. Don't argue. Don't explain more than asked. Just anchor yourself in fact. Facts are our fortress." "I'm ready," I told him. And for the first time, I believed it. I stood before the mirror one last time, holding my notes. The familiar tremor tried to creep back, but I pushed it aside. "My name is Renata Moretti," I said, eyes locked on my reflection. "And I am not here to beg. I am here to testify." I let the silence after the sentence linger like a bell after it struck. Then I smiled. Not for Lucas, not for Anna, not for Alberto, not even for the judge I had yet to see. For me. At midnight, I returned to the workshop. The white mask still sat on its shelf, cracked along the cheek. I lifted it carefully, tracing the fracture with my thumb. The crack no longer frightened me. It reminded me that even broken things can be displayed, not hidden. I whispered to it, to myself, to the ghosts of every silence I had swallowed. Tomorrow I speak, and I will not tremble. I placed the mask back in its place, locked the safe, and slipped the key into my pocket. It rested there, cool and solid like a promise. The courtroom smelled of polish and paper. White lights hummed above, merciless, flattening every wrinkle into exposure. The benches groaned as strangers shuffled, curious eyes darting toward me, toward Lucas, toward Anna. It was no longer a private battle in my dining room. It was spectacle, law, society. The judge entered. A gavel cracked against the wood, cold, sharp. The sound sliced through me. I sat at the defendant's table beside Alberto and Marta. Across the aisle, Lucas avoided my gaze. Anna sat tall, her chin lifted, lips painted in a shade too red for mourning. A lawyer in a navy suit shuffled their files, sleek and sure. The opposing lawyer rose. Your Honor, he began smoothly, this is a case of responsibility. My clients, Lucas and Anna Moretti, acted not out of greed, but out of care. Mrs. Moretti is elderly, forgetful, vulnerable. They sought to protect her assets before harm befell her. I felt my nails dig into my palms. Elderly, forgetful, vulnerable. Words sharpened into chains. The lawyer lifted the forged power of attorney. Here is the signed authorization, dated April 3rd. Proof that she entrusted them willingly. He placed it on the evidence stand with a flourish, like a magician producing a dove. Alberto stood slowly, like a man who knew storms and didn't fear them. He adjusted his glasses. Your Honor, we contend that document is false, and we will show, beyond doubt, that Mrs. exist. Moretti could not have signed it. He nodded to Marta, who handed the judge a packet. Inside, the clinic logs, the pharmacy receipt, the church ledger, the CCTV still, our arsenal. Witness 1, Dr. Almeida, clinic director. On April 3rd, between 10 and 12, Mrs. Imbersi, Moretti was in our waiting room. She signed our register. Here is the log. The judge examined the page. There it was, Renata Moretti, 10/18. My name, written in my own hand, steady, unmistakable. Opposing counsel objected. A signature on a log is hardly proof she could have left after signing. But the doctor leaned in. She was present for nearly 90 minutes. She left at 11:50. We have surveillance footage of the entrance. Time-stamped. The judge nodded. One blow returned. Their side called a barista from a cafe near the notary's office. I served her that morning, 11:15. White-haired, blue scarf. My breath stuttered. My scarf. Alberto rose calmly. Your Honor, the blue scarf was donated to a church charity 6 weeks prior. Here is the ledger. Item 27, February 19th. The barista faltered. Maybe it was another scarf. Another woman. His eyes darted, searching for escape. The judge made a note. The crowd shifted, first ripple of doubt against them. Lucas took the stand, my son, his hand on the Bible, his eyes on the floor. He spoke quietly, but each word was a knife. My mother has been confused lately. She repeats stories. She misplaces things. We only wanted to help. I wanted to cry out, to grab him, to shake him into remembering, but I sat still. His voice was not the boy who once called me a magician. It was a stranger reading from a script. He would not look at me. Not once. Inez, hair pinned back, shoulders straight. On April 3rd, she was with me at the clinic. We walked there together. We waited together. She complained about the chairs, too hard on the back. That's not something you forget. The courtroom chuckled softly. Even the judge allowed a ghost of a smile. Truth had texture. Lies did not. He held up the receipt, time-stamped 10/37. She bought bandages. Paper cut. I remember because she joked, even my masks drink my blood. I flushed. I had said that once, years ago, to Lucas. That morning, it had slipped out again. A truth. Now it was an anchor. Opposing counsel pressed again. Elderly people can be manipulated. Perhaps she signed without understanding. Alberto stepped forward. His voice sharpened. Then why forge a witness? Why borrow a notary's seal? Why fabricate what truth would have provided? Silence. The judge's gaze shifted, heavy, assessing. Alberto glanced at me. His eyes said, "Now." I rose. My knees quivered, but my voice did not. "Your Honor," I began, "I am 64. My hands shake from glue, not from weakness. My hair is silver, yes, but my mind is clear. For 24 years, I worked in a workshop selling 300 masks so my son could study. Every cut on these fingers paid for his books. Every sleepless night became his tuition." I inhaled, steady. I thought love meant silence. I thought motherhood meant paying without question. But today I stand here not to beg, not to hide, not to bleed again. I stand here to keep the only thing left, my dignity. I looked at Lucas then, his face blurred through my tears. My home is not theirs to steal. My silence is not theirs to exploit. Enough. The last word cracked like glass. The judge leaned back, hands folded. The room was still. Then, 3 strikes of the gavel. This court rejects the claim. The document presented is declared false. The property remains with Mrs. Moretti. Allegations against her are unfounded. The sound echoed through the chamber. Wood against wood. Final. Anna's face drained of color. Lucas bowed his head, shoulders collapsing inward. The lawyer gathered his files in stiff silence. I sat down slowly, my body shaking, my breath ragged. But my chest was light. The windows behind the bench spilled sunlight across the floor, gold slicing through white. My eyes stung, but for the first time in months, my tears were not bitter. They were salt, yes, but sweetened too like seawater carried on wind. I looked at my cracked white mask in my imagination. It no longer frightened me. The fracture was not ruin, it was release. That night, the house was unbearably still. After hours of questions and gavel strikes, after the courtroom whispers and the final blow of judgment, I came home to silence. I slipped off my shoes and let them fall at the door. My body ached as though I had carried stone up a mountain. I should have felt relief. I had won. The judge had declared the papers false. The house, the savings, the workshop, they were mine. Yet as I lay in bed, tears bled into the pillow. I stared at the ceiling where faint cracks traced like rivers, and the weight of absence pressed down. I had won, but what had I kept? The room felt colder than usual, though the heater hummed softly. I turned to the side where my husband used to sleep. The sheets there were smooth, untouched, as if no one had ever lain there at all. I remembered Lucas as a boy crawling into that space during thunderstorms, whispering, "Mom, the thunder can't find me if I hide next to you." Now, in the darkness, the only thunder was inside me. I rose, restless, and walked into the kitchen. The clock on the wall ticked too loudly, each second dragging like a nail across metal. I filled the kettle, set it on the stove, and watched steam gather. When the whistle rose, sharp and lonely, I poured hot water into a cup. The scent of chamomile drifted up, a soft balm. I wrapped both hands around the mug and let its warmth bleed into me. Victory tasted like this tea, warm, calming, but with a trace of bitterness that lingered on the tongue. I thought of Lucas's face in court, the way he turned from me, the way his jaw tightened when I spoke. He hadn't looked once into my eyes. Even when the judge read the verdict, he stared at the floor as if the tiles had betrayed him. And Anna, her lips pressed into a hard line, her shoulders rigid, her eyes knives that refused to cut me only because the law stood in the way. Yes, I had defeated their claim, but in doing so, I had lost them. The silence in the house was not peace. It was vacancy. I carried the mug to my workshop. The scent of glue and paper lingered as it always did, but tonight it felt different. I switched on the small lamp. Its glow spilled across the workbench, illuminating brushes, molds, scraps of painted paper. And on the shelf, the cracked white mask. I lifted it down carefully, as though it might crumble. The fracture across its cheek caught the light. Once I had hidden it away, ashamed of its imperfection. Now it seemed almost honest. Running my thumb along the crack, I whispered, "We're still here." The mask, the house, my name, still here. But Lucas, Anna, gone in a way no court could reverse. I sank into the chair and let memory wash over me. Nights of working through fevers, days of stretching coins into meals, mornings of tying Lucas's shoelaces when my fingers were blistered from glue. I had thought each sacrifice was an offering, a seed. But perhaps I had only planted expectations that grew into demands. Was it my fault? Did my silence raise a son who mistook my devotion for duty? The tears came again, hot and sudden. I pressed the cracked mask against my chest and sobbed into the paper smell. Yet somewhere between sobs, breath steadied. My body softened against the chair. The mask didn't shatter in my hands. It held, and so did I. For the first time, I understood. Winning the case didn't mean regaining what I had lost. It meant proving I could exist without surrender. That was not happiness. Not yet, but it was survival. When dawn seeped pale through the curtains, I was still in the workshop. I rose, joints stiff, and opened the window. Cold air rushed in, carrying the smell of wet stone and faint jasmine from the neighbor's yard. I stood there a long time, breathing it in, letting it remind me that the world moved on. Beyond betrayal, beyond verdicts, life kept growing. I placed the mask back on the shelf, its crack catching the first beam of sun. Not hidden, not disguised, displayed. Later, Inez knocked, holding a basket of oranges. "You didn't sleep, did you?" she asked gently. "No," I admitted. She pressed the basket into my hands. "Then eat. Strength comes in small pieces." I smiled faintly. Even the smallest kindness felt like a bridge over emptiness. That night, lying in bed again, I touched the pillow where my tears had dried. The emptiness was still there, but it no longer terrified me. It was space. Space where something else might one day grow. I had thought victory meant having everything back. Instead, it meant daring to let go. The river in Lisbon sparkled under the late morning sun. I sat at a cafe near the waterfront, the kind of place where the tables were painted in fading blues and the chairs tilted slightly on cobblestones. The air carried salt from the Atlantic, and every sip of espresso tasted lighter than any drink I had ever known. I cupped the tiny porcelain cup in both hands. In the beginning of this journey, my hands had always been heavy with tickets, with signatures, with duties I couldn't set down. Now, they held nothing more than this fragile cup, and somehow it was enough. The apartment I rented overlooked the Tagus. Every morning, I walked barefoot across the wooden floor, opened the windows wide, and let the wind rush in. The breeze filled the rooms like a song, scattering papers, lifting curtains, carrying away the last traces of silence that once suffocated me. In Venice, silence had been punishment thick, choking, a sign of things left unsaid. Here, silence was a canvas. I painted it each day with new colors. The chatter of students in my workshop, the scrape of chairs during lessons, the laughter that sometimes burst out when a mask collapsed under too much glue. Yes, I had opened a workshop again, not to sell masks, not to bleed my hands for survival, but to teach. A handful of students, tourists, art lovers, young locals came to learn the craft. I showed them how to cut the paper, how to shape it over wooden molds, how to press gently so the form would hold. They called me professora. Some even called me maestra. Each time, the title startled me like a new dress I wasn't sure fit. But then I would see their eyes widen as a plain piece of paper turned into a face, and I'd remember Lucas's childhood cry, "Mom is a magician. She turns paper into faces." For a moment, the words still hurt. But in the workshop, they belonged to me again. On a high shelf, in plain sight, I placed the white mask. Once hidden, Once a secret symbol of shame, it now hung in the open, cracked but dignified. Students often asked about it. "Why don't you paint this one?" they'd say. I would smile, because sometimes the cracks are the art. And that was all. No explanation, no hiding. The mask had become not my wound, but my witness. I often thought back to the contrast. At the airport, I had clutched tickets that felt like chains. Here, in Lisbon, I held coffee that felt like freedom. At home in Venice, the ticking clock had clawed at my chest. Here, the bells of the nearby church rang openly, their echoes drifting across the river, and I welcomed the sound. Once I measured my worth by how much I gave away. Now I measured it by how much space I allowed myself to breathe. I didn't hear from Lucas or Anna. Not a call, not a letter. At first, that absence gnawed at me. I waited by the phone, half hoping it would ring with apology. It never did. And then one morning, I realized I no longer expected it to. Their silence was theirs to carry. Mine had already been set free. One evening after class, a student lingered. She was a girl of 19, with paint on her sleeves and a nervous tremor in her hands. She asked, "Do you think art can save someone?" I paused, then touched the cracked white mask on the shelf. "Not save, perhaps, but it can show you who you are, and that is its own kind of salvation." She nodded, eyes shining, as though I had given her more than a lesson in papier-mâché. I thought to myself, once I would have said the same about love. Now I knew better. Love is not silence. Love is not sacrifice until you disappear. Love must start where the mask ends. Days unfolded gently. I learned the names of the waiters at the cafe, the rhythm of the ferry horns, the way the light shifted over the river between dawn and dusk. I was no longer rushing, no longer bleeding to keep others afloat. I was simply alive, and it was enough. Sometimes, walking home, I caught my reflection in a shop window. I didn't see a widow or a mother abandoned at an airport. I didn't see a woman fighting in court. I saw a face lined, imperfect, unhidden, my own. On Sundays, I sat on the balcony with a notebook, not to account for bills or debts, but to write small notes, a recipe I wanted to try, a sketch of a mask idea, a single sentence I wanted to remember. One page reads, "Freedom tastes like strong coffee and sea air." Another, "The crack is not the end, it's the place where light enters." These were not lessons for anyone else. They were reminders for me. One afternoon, a storm swept in from the ocean. Rain lashed the windows, waves pounded the quay, thunder rolled across the city. I stood barefoot on the balcony, soaked through, laughing. For years, storms had frightened me because Lucas would hide, because silence would fall heavier, because walls felt too thin. Now, I let the rain wash me, the thunder shake me, the lightning illuminate me. I no longer needed to hide from storms. That night, wrapped in a blanket, I looked once more at the cracked white mask in its place of honor. For so long, it had represented the weight I couldn't name. Now, it was just a piece of paper and plaster, bearing a fracture that told the truth. I whispered, "Thank you for breaking. I have told you everything." From the airport silence to the courtroom gavel, from the night soaked with tears to the mornings washed clean by Lisbon light, I have laid out my masks one by one until nothing stood between my face and yours. Thank you for walking with me. Thank you for staying through the heaviness, for not turning away when the cracks appeared. If you are still here, it means you've traveled with me through a journey of betrayal, of courage, of quiet victories. That, in itself, is a kind of companionship I never expected, but deeply cherish. You and I may never meet. You may be reading this on a crowded bus or in the stillness of your own room. Yet through these words, our lives have touched. And I hope in some small way my story has placed a mirror in front of you, not to show my face, but to reveal your own. Because this was never only about me. It was about the moments when love becomes a cage, when silence becomes consent, when the people closest to us mistake our devotion for duty and our sacrifices for obligations. It was about the moment when you finally ask, "Who am I without the mask?" So I ask you now, just one question. If one day you discover you are merely a supporting character in someone else's script, will you keep wearing their mask or will you take it off? I don't need your answer today. Let it sit with you. Let it whisper in the quiet hours. Let it rise in your chest when you feel the weight of someone else's expectations pressing down. If this story has stirred something in you, don't let it stay silent. Speak, share, write your own version, or simply leave a comment so I know you are here, that you too are peeling back a mask. And if you wish to hear more stories like this, stories not polished for perfection, but cracked enough to be true, then stay with me. Follow along. Each week, I will bring you another journey, another voice, another reminder that none of us are as alone as we think. I close now, not with advice, not with answers, but with gratitude for your time, for your presence, for your willingness to face what is often easier to look away from. The masks may fall, but the courage to face each other, that is what remains. Thank you.